hello there and how you doing? And welcome to YESTERDAVE, the show where I take us back in time, and not in a sort of kidnapping way like an Army of Darkness, to ponder just what it was like to grow up in an entirely different era of gaming. We're going to be looking at some particular selections from the Room of Doom to ask the probing questions like, what was it like to grow up with zero friends in the 90s, a decade where consoles were much more angular and actually had buttons so you knew how to turn the bloody thing on without referring to an engineering document. Buttons. What a time to be alive.
Today we'll be taking a look at the seminal Doom series to recap the trials and tribulations of just what it was like to be a fan over the years of the shotgun-booming, demon-slaying pulp splatathon that seemed to change dramatically with the third one.
I guess it is like Army of Darkness.
The first time I laid my eyes on the original Doom in early 1996, I knew I wasn't in the Mushroom Kingdom anymore. Just a year beforehand, my family was making the big decision to buy our first family computer. I was offered the choice of either a 386 or a 486.
So of course I said the one with the bigger number. Duh, Mom, you blethering idiot.
So, after talking to the nice computer man in the local shop, we hauled a compact ProLinear 466 home, a concrete slab the size of Jupiter that contained a mighty 486 DX2 with a whopping 66 megahertz of power, 8 megabytes of RAM, and Windows 3.11. The graphics card? It basically comprised of me yelling at it to do frames faster.
Which worked more often than you'd think.
Unfortunately, this isn't a photo of my original computer since it was actually gutted and is now used as Dallas City Hall. So we had a new computer, but I didn't really have a clue how games worked on them. I partially assumed that they were kind of like a games console and that you could buy any game for any system, but something felt off about that.
So what do you do when you don't know what you're doing? You dive in at the deep end like a moron.
So we went to PC World, where I decided the game to show off my new cyberpunk hunk was Euro 96? I don't even really care about football. I think there was just something really 3D about the camera spinning around everywhere with all the little players running around that got me really excited. This was when everything basically made the leap to 3D, and football games went from this to this, and it blew my little mind.
Anyway, I couldn't get it working for some reason, so I had to take it back. My little beep boop machine just wasn't up to the task.
I would say I learned the hard way about system requirements, but I have a weird feeling that Euro 96 wasn't going to give me the same decades of joy that some of the games we're going to talk about had.
Besides, what do I have a football game for? We have it outside. We don't need football at home. And outside, all it cost was a cup championship football. And my dignity from the time a guy called Johnny dared me to rub my bare bum on the brick wall at the back of my parents' house for 30 seconds straight. Naturally, my mum walked out 10 seconds into it and screamed, "What are you doing?" I had no reasonable answer. Some say there's still 2 butt-cheek-shaped marks on the wall where moss no longer grows.
Anyway, when I was no longer grounded, my boys and I were hanging out in the back lane one day when our neighbor Eddie brings out his laptop and shows us some pixelated breasts.
No, he wasn't one of those creeps that was showing kids adult content out the back of his house. Instead, he was showcasing the one and only
Duke Nukem 3D, which was kind of the closest you could get at the time. Behold the pixels of moral decay. Duke in 1996 was one of the hottest PC games around, so naturally I wangled a couple of floppy disks worth of a copy for myself. I checked the minimum system requirements, and behold, they matched perfectly. But what? For some reason, I couldn't get this game working either. I started to think that PCs were just, stupid. Why would you spend so much time and energy trying to get a game to work when you could just slide a cart into your Nintendo hole like the little slut it is? After trying once more with a game called Fatal Racing, or Whiplash as some of you might know it as, and finding out that it too ran like a slideshow, I was unsure what to do.
Incidentally, a year ago I bought an old Pentium 3 off Marketplace and bought Whiplash for the nostalgia. Turns out that the single-digit frame rate completely masked the fact that it's total shit. Core memories destroyed.
So, in the end, my dad took our Per 486 to Mr. Computer Man again, and he decided to install a few choice corkers that he knew would work on this computer that turned out to be a delightful surprise. In no particular order, I now own these games: the brilliantly violent Battle Chess.
It's chess with blood.
The revolutionary and accidentally hilarious 1994 racer NASCAR Racing, in which you could draw your own car designs. Naturally, I drew a big ass on mine and drove it backwards around the course to make big crashes. The sublime SimCity 2000.
I actually managed to skip school for an entire week by telling my mum that SimCity was teaching me about, like, civics, ordinances, and city planning and stuff like that. Which it sort of was, but it was also teaching me about aliens and, like, putting parks beside exploding power plants.
And finally, Doom. Doom was frankly unlike anything I'd ever seen in my life. I'd played Wolfenstein 3D on the Super Nintendo before, which was disturbing for all the wrong reasons, like large rats and Frankenstein monsters, but it was simply nothing like this. Here was a 3D world with stairs, ceilings, freaky backgrounds, some really frightening texture work, and a body feeling of brutalist, Soviet, retro, sci-fi architecture mixed with demented gothic towers of flesh and screaming physics.
Of course, I didn't know any of those words yet, so I was just like, yay, cool.
After spending so much time with Mario on the Super Nintendo, Doom felt like an awakening, like a coalescence of all the cool shit my older cousin had been showing me. Heavy metal, demonic scary shit, cybernetic style robots mixed with a world of rocket launchers, chain guns, nail guns, and bright blue plasma. It made me want to rip my little shirt off and go, yeah! The pacing of Doom was so different to anything I'd played before as well. When you weren't chasing down hordes of demons, you were wandering around eerie, empty corridors at your own pace, exploring and taking in every detail of every texture, with only the occasional blurb of walking over an item or the downbeat, off-kilter sounding MIDI music for company. This was my Black Sabbath. This was my Exorcist. This gorish tapestry would change my life so much, and I was only 11 years old. The plot was thin, but the environments were dripping with lore without saying a word. Who were these freaky red-eyed gargoyles that stared from the doors? Who does the all-seeing evil eye belong to? And what the hell happened to these poor guys? You certainly didn't see this in the Mushroom Kingdom. Not only had I never really seen anything like this before in a video game, but the detail was just enough for you to make out what a sprite was meant to be, while leaving enough to the imagination to let my troubled brain fill in the blanks on its own. This guy squirming in 2 frames of animation was enough to seriously freak me out. This hanging guy in particular left me really disturbed. Like, was he swinging because he's on a rope? Or is he still alive and moving even without his legs? His face is obscured just enough for you to project your own horrific conclusions and keep you staring in hopes to be able to come to some sort of logical answer.
And that's the scary part about Doom. It doesn't really give you any answers. It just says, here's some big guns, and here's some freaky demonic stuff, and you figure out the rest.
The levels are large liminal spaces without reason that can sometimes just go on and on and on forever while retaining a subliminal visual message that almost feels like hell propaganda. Despite wandering into the unknown, you can feel an unseen force constantly talking to you without saying a word. What's this big starship mean? What the hell is this building for? Whose face is this? What do the skin rivers mean? That's right, skin rivers. Everything is so otherworldly that it constantly makes the player wonder as to the intent or purpose, while also making everything feel like a pulsing machine that's only depraved purpose is to cause pain. Like, duh, of course this is the unholy cathedral. Look at it. Everything's got some rad biblical sounding name like the Slough of Despair, or Dis, or Halls of the Damned, or even Warrens. I'm still not sure why it's called that, but it just kind of makes me think of some dude called Warren, but like in an evil way. Warren.
Actually, we're gonna look this up right now. Okay, here we go. According to this helpful AI overview,
in the Doom video game, the level called Warrens is named so because it resembles a network of interconnected tunnels and chambers, similar to the concept of a warren, which is a complex underground burrow system typically associated with rabbits, creating a sense of disorientation and claustrophobia within the gameplay due to its maze-like structure.
that's fucking sick!
The level is like an intestinal web of chambers and tubes dug out by something animalistic and primal. Fuck yeah! Doom makes things even crazier by putting these bowl-like monoliths beside royal blue techno walls and what looks like fuzzy blue shag carpeting that I bet smells really nice. I almost want to sleep on that. And that's the thing. Quite often color palettes are so defined. Matrix is green, Minority Report is blue. Doom throws every color at you. and the beautiful reds, blues, greens, and silvers collide into a sort of scary kaleidoscope that looks dazzling on any monitor, particularly an old CRT.
Here's the crazy thing about Doom. I haven't even mentioned what most people talk about when they talk about Doom yet. The weapons, the enemies, and the music.
I won't even go too far into the weapons and enemies because you probably already know everything there is to know. All I can say is the first time you see one of these ham beasts running at you, you know it ain't no Goomba, Mario.
I bet it tastes really good too, like, honey glazed ham.
The weapons, as genre-defining as they are, you are all too used to now. However, very few, if any, games have been able to quite replicate the meaty satisfaction of blasting a gurning hole into a demon's chest with a shotgun so hard that they fly back a few feet. Honestly, I don't think even it themselves quite managed to come close until Quake 3 Arena, which was over half a decade later.
That might not seem so long, but it was an eternity for the video games industry, and particularly for an actual child.
Let's see. Duke Nukem 3D? Pretty good. Quake? Not feeling it quite the same. Quake 2? Nah. Half-Life? I like it. GoldenEye? No. I think everyone would agree that 1993 Doom is still the benchmark for a shotgun in a video game. An enemy needs to react viscerally to it. It needs to fly back or be torn to shreds. And the gun needs to sound like a cannon that coughs cybernetic porcupines that'll rip and tear someone's innards into bad guy's silly string. Like, watch this. Bam!
Speaking of the sound, let's talk about the music.
Before Doom, video games to me always sounded like this. Then I was thrust into this. I'm not quite sure what it was about the chirpy sounding MIDI, but it deeply unsettled me, like it was talking in some weird foreign language.
The sound set was usually used for obnoxious platforming games, so to hear my 486 playing the Devil's Tritone, aka that most hellish of note sequences, was frankly insane.
Here is my lovely new 486 channeling Diabolus in Musica, Satan's notes of impure dissonance, the favorites of bands that used to put fear into the hearts of the silent generation. Sabbath, Priest, or maybe Metallica and Pantera. We'll get to that in a second. A lot of people think about the first level's music, or maybe the map music when they think about the original Doom. Rockin' ball busters, but the real delights are to be found in the atmospheric deeper cuts. Consider the slow dread of the dark halls, whose glassy synth acts as a shimmering echo of the hollow, empty corridors and the refractions of the toxic fluid that surrounds you. Consider the slow pulse of the dazzlingly titled Imp song. Seriously, did an imp write this? Imagine an imp in the corner like... When you've cleared the halls of vicious enemies, it almost acts as a calming force that you can kinda groove to. Later on, as we maim our way into the crypts, castles, and turrets of the deepest levels of hell, the songs almost become weirdly medieval, like this little that used to genuinely scare me, Waltz of the Demons. Even the name, Waltz of the Demons, it has such a lore attached to it, like this is an ancient song, to be played under shadow and candlelight as you perform some necro-butcher sacrifice. Wandering through the green medieval bricks and lakes of blood, you can't help but imagine a bunch of demons scampering around in a circle like this.
What could their horrid ritual be? What insidious force are they conjuring? Is it just a really great birthday party?
Who knows? But it left it all to my 11-year-old imagination that could only put the worst conclusions together, just like a blurry horror fic with an audacity-driven practical effect.
And then finally there's this fucking nut of a track. It's simply called Sinister.
Wandering through the blackened catacombs of the halls of the damned, you don't know when another bloody ham beast is gonna jump out at you. There are growls and echoes in the distance. These fecking faces won't stop staring at you from the shadows, and this song is putting more willies up me than a gay squid. To me, it just screams knowing malevolence, and is kind of one of the coolest bits of music ever put together. Right from that first eerie, twisting half-step passage in the intro to when the thumping drum and snare kicks in, this song encapsulates what Doom is all about. Oppressive eeriness, ultimate badassery, a sense of forlorn insignificance in the face of hell's mocking void, a sense of being utterly, absolutely alone. In Mario, I always felt like the one guy that everyone could count on. Doom, I felt completely engulfed by the blackness, and I was intoxicated by it.
I just found out that this was John Romero's favorite track in the game too. Good minds. Gosh, if only there were real versions of these songs performed by actual bands. That would be dope. Wait, what?
Skipping forward a bit here for a second, it was an utter thrill to discover that some of these songs were based on real metal songs with like proper instruments and everything.
I think the first time I heard Mouth for War by Pantera, I literally jumped out of my chair and went, "This is Doom music!"
Again, the same when I heard Behind the Crooked Cross by Slayer, or later on, Gothic Stone by Candlemass. In so many different ways, Doom has informed so many of the things that I now love that I have grown up a thrash metal maniac. I've picked up a guitar. I enjoy the wicked art of hellish artists like Basinski, while reveling in the otherworldly industrial horror of movies like Aliens. I've got a patch jacket with a dang logo on the back.
I rip and tear when it comes to embroidery as well as Doom.
Hell, I've even started a crushing metal band with a couple of buddies.
We're called Petrified Giant, and we're about to put out an album.
I discovered Doom during the second wave of its popularity, around the time the PlayStation port was released along with many other console conversions. Doom Mania was everywhere. The magazines couldn't stop talking about it, and the quality of a port seemed to reflect entirely on the quality of the console. The PlayStation version seemed to fare best, with new lighting alongside a complete sound overhaul. The bleeps and blurps of the PC original were replaced with almost echoey, sickly sound effects that made you feel like you were underwater, creating a slightly horror-centric feel, like a sort of bad dream. The music, too, had been replaced with nightmare soundscapes by Aubrey Hodges, featuring a cacophony of babies crying, hellish screams, and dark horror synths that were once only the domain of deep-cut horror movies. Although as an 11-year-old I found PC Doom freaky, this was the first time Doom, I think, went all-out horror. For me, personally, it wasn't my bag, but I'm glad it exists.
So, considering how much I love Doom, what did I think of Doom 2? Didn't play it at the time, to be honest. I don't think I even knew it existed for a good while.
By the time I learned of it, people were already banging on about the first screenshots of the Doom killer, Quake, so I focused my attention on that instead. The creators of Doom, id Software, were rock stars just as much as bands like Guns N' Roses by this point. The magazines told tales of their American dream, rags to riches story. Long nights spent designing one of the coolest games on Earth with only pizza, Coke, and heavy metal to keep them going. As a kid, it honestly sounded like the best job on Earth. Getting to create unearthly horrors while slamming Cokes, then becoming millionaires with fast cars, it was everything your mum feared. Instead of being warned of the dangers of fast food, Satan, and soda, these guys were being amply rewarded for it. It felt like a real underdog story with a real rebellious undertone. It was a real fuck you to authority at the time. Video games were seen as kind of dorky and a waste of time, but these guys were the coolest dudes on Earth.
Their story was very inspiring to me, and it still is. I became a fan of id Software, not just Doom.
Over the years, our family replaced our dusty old 486 with a Pentium 133, eventually a Pentium 2, and so on, and I spent plenty of time with Quake and Quake 2. Although brilliant games in their own right, they never quite scratched the same itch that Doom did. The guns never felt quite right. Everything felt like I was shooting bullets into, like, baking dough. The colors weren't there either. Everything was kind of a sinewy brown, like staring into a toilet in a dive bar. Again, I enjoyed these games for what they were, but it wasn't until I saw the first screenshots of Quake 3 that my Doom sense started prickling again. Quake 3 looked quite simply insane. Nothing looked like these first screenshots in 1998. Not even the spectacular looking Unreal. Quite simply, it looked like the future. But more importantly, look at the colors! Look at the spiked pillars of flesh. Look at the goddamn demonic monstrosities that you can play as. And look at that damn shotgun. The new curved surface polygons, reflections, and real-time lighting meant that Quake 3 was one of the first games to require a 3D accelerator.
Do you know how hard it is to convince your dad to buy an extra expensive bit for the computer just to play more games in 1999?
We eventually settled on the budget 3D Banshee with 16 megabytes of RAM, which was still twice as much as my entire 486 computer back in the day. It got me in the door though, and I got some familiar heavy metal jollies from exploring Quake 3's gargling, intestinal rooms made of flesh and bone, as intense industrial riffs played. I eventually got really good at Quake 3, and I would regularly compete in a local LAN arena, but that's for another day.
Around this time, I was in my mid-teens, and the whole first-person shooter world, it changed dramatically.
Half-Life in 1998 changed everything, kind of for the good and kind of for the bad if you enjoyed run-and-gun shooters. For me, it was the first living, breathing world where I felt like there were genuine consequences for my actions.
Or unforeseen consequences, you might say.
The game familiarized you with its NPCs and characters. And not that I had particularly defined characters, but they were friends and companions long before everything hit the fan and you watched them suffer. The voice acting was on a different level for the time. I could feel the panic in the friendlies, and if I shot a scientist or security guard that was otherwise offering help and assistance, I felt terrible. Shooters eventually leaned much further into the quest for realism with a two-pronged attack, namely the release of Counter-Strike and eventually Medal of Honor Allied Assault. Counter-Strike was a multiplayer game, but in a way, it kind of changed the entire scene overnight. Sci-fi weaponry and environments were out, and ultra-realistic simulations of real guns were in. Gymnastics-style high-flying rocket battles were out, and hiding behind a crate was in.
I'll be straight up. This wasn't for me. My ADHD-riddled brain just could not handle the patience. I had to run out guns blazing. I had to be the dang hero, and I hated waiting to play again after I died in Counter-Strike.
This period was kind of a dark time for my shooter career. Even new id games such as Return to Castle Wolfenstein were considered a little bit old hat. Everything became about realism, historical recreation, cover shooting, team building. I felt like a Super Saiyan playing Quake 3, but games like Counter-Strike made me feel weak and small, like I'd absolutely die within a second on a real battlefield. And that's okay. It seemed to be what the public wanted. And it seemed that my days of enjoying the most cutting-edge first-person shooters were, well, at least for now, over.
But then, Macworld 2001 happened.
John Carmack from id Software.
Doom 3 looked like the answer to all my prayers. Look! Zombies, imps, pinkies, freaky shadows, futuristic industrial facilities. Like Quake 3 before it, let's just say there was nothing to match how Doom 3 looked in 2001. The model detail was sure to make any contemporary PC do a big digital shit in their technopants. And sure enough, I simply couldn't afford the equipment required to get it running by the time it came out in August 2004. By then, I was starved of classic shooter action. I was hungry for one single crouton of boomer shooter goodness in a never-ending buffet of military shooter salad.
Yeah, I know I could have played Unreal Tournament 2003, but I didn't, okay?
My first opportunity to play Doom 3 came in Christmas of 2004, when my buddy Vinny barely managed to get it working on his home computer. We were kind of disappointed for two reasons. One, it didn't feel much like the Doom games that we grew up with. And number two, sitting next to it was Half-Life 2.
It really was the most unfortunate timing in a way. After years of holding out for Doom 3 to save the genre, Half-Life 2 surprised everyone, and in my opinion, to this very day, is still one of the most imminently replayable and revolutionary games ever made. It always surprises me when a friend has told me they've never played Half-Life 2. It got so much right, from the physics, to the combat, to the AI, to the visual storytelling. It made Doom 3 feel like the now 6 years old Half-Life 1. I won't go on too much about Doom 3 and its merits, because I'm sure you can find a bajillion essays about it on YouTube already. But all I can say is that at the time, it was very much not my savior. I was at a loose end. In the mid-2000s, id Software-related games were kind of at a low ebb. For me, they were the opposite of what I believed was the original id philosophy. They almost seemed like they were behind the times, or trying to ape something else. Quake 4, eventually released in 2005, it was alright, but it was unashamedly trying to appeal to jarheads and squad-based shooter nuts, albeit with kind of a Quake 2 skin. It looked really nice, but let's get one thing straight. These IDTech 4-based shooters just didn't feel good. Remember what I said about the shotgun in the original Doom? It felt kind of terrible in Doom 3. Quake 4 actually improved on this a good bit, but it still feels a bit like you're blowing air at the enemy rather than blowing them away with shrapnel. And they kind of dissolved into magic mush on the spot rather than career backwards from the velocity. It kind of felt id was kind of over. The torch had been passed on to the likes of Valve's Half-Life series and 2K's BioShock series. The dream, it was over. Fast forward a few years. It's 2012. I've since moved over 4,000 miles from where I grew up, and I'm now living in Dallas, Texas, building a new animation studio and trying to fulfill my own dream.
If you're anywhere near the tech world in Dallas, you kind of feel the spirits of guys like John Romero and John Carmack sitting on your shoulder. After all, this is where id Software is based, and this is where Doom was made.
Their new game, Rage, had just been released, and I wasn't terribly interested, to be honest.
I don't know what it is, I just don't really like desert punky kind of stuff.
But there were rumors of a possible new return to the Doom series. Thing is, though, the rumors weren't great. Apparently it was stuck in some sort of development hell, and not the good kind, and it lacked any real direction. All I knew is that no matter what it was, I was probably going to buy it, so I suppose I'd better build a new PC just in case it ever sees the light of day. It was like playing chicken with time. It was completely possible that my brand new PC could be entirely obsolete before this new game comes out. And there it is, my first Dallas computer, which I lovingly called Thor because, well, Thor. An i7 2600K CPU, 4 gigs of RAM, and a shiny new GTX 680 graphics card. I didn't know what mileage I'd get out of this thing as far as being able to play a new id game, but it did the job for whatever else I wanted to play. Deep down though, this computer had one purpose, and it better see it through. 2 years later, June 2014. You know what got me amped about this trailer more than anything? They used a door-opening sound effect from the original 1993 Doom!
I remember screaming, "They used an old Doom sound effect!" Like some sort of addict chimp going through withdrawal, and I was about to shoot up.
It was the first drop of rain that fell into my desert-like reservoir of hope. That tiny detail suggested that they knew what guys like me were looking for. They understood the legacy of the original and how much hyper-obsession had been poured into every crevice of the original game by the fans. I felt seen for the first time in a long time. Despite the trailer revealing very little, there it was, that little Bunsen burner of excitement burning away again. Over the course of the next year, they teased the new Doom here and there, saying all the right words.
Badass demons, big effing guns. That's right. And moving really, really fast.
Culminating in a full gameplay reveal the day after my dang marriage.
Having a loving new wife is one thing, but this!
I remember lying in bed in our Airbnb in Dublin, and everyone's ready to go out and have some fun, but I was busy drooling over my laptop like a dog licking piss. The crowd reactions say it all. We're back! The game looked leagues ahead of everything else in 2015. The detail on the floor, the reflections of the helmet, the reveal of the huge refinery, which seemed like a twisted mesh of Doom 3 and classic Doom. The subtle hint of a freaking double jump, which suggested a return to the gymnastics of yore. And then, our first enemy encounter. Holy shit, what was that? Suddenly ripping and tearing like a madman was back on the menu. I sat mouth and butt agape as the Slayer removed jaws, hearts, and bones with an efficiency that would put any surgeon out of a job. The unbridled violence was back. But most importantly, watch the shotgun.
Yeah, boy!
Bam! There it is! That familiar boom thunk. The very essence of what made Doom 1993 so incredible. It was back! The environments may look more like Doom 3, but the fast-paced violence was back on track. Then they showed off a different environment. Hell! The skulls on spikes! The chains of torture! It was all here! But most importantly, the palette was back. The jade walls and dark blood rivers echo beautifully the twisted, nightmarish landscapes of the original Shores of Hell and Inferno. It's hard to describe being excited by colors in such a way, but after living in Browntown for so many years, it was incredible to see these tones mixed in with bright purples and deep reds. This was clearly Doom made by 1993 Doom fans for 1993 Doom fans. My excitement hit peak. My Doom hard-on was going to explode. A year later, May the 13th, 2016, I sat in my office eagerly awaiting Steam to finish downloading. It had been 12 years since the previous mainline entry in the Doom series, and as the title screen loaded up for the first time, all I could think was to take a picture. Thor, my computer, was now 4 years old. Doom was a visual treat, and so there were genuine nerves about whether the old gal could move it at a playable pace. Amazingly, it ran like butter. Doom 2016 was brilliantly optimized, and Thor served her purpose.
I should probably get a big box to put it on the wall, like some sort of museum. Below it, it should say, "The little GPU that could. The card that ran Doom 2016. You did it, buddy. Mwah. Rest easy."
I spent hundreds of hours in Doom 2016. It was the comeback I was looking for, and as the gaming industry reveled in the game's triumph, I began to make friends in places I never thought I would. id Software in more recent years had moved to an office close to where I lived in Dallas.
This is where it all happens.
And as I started attending QuakeCon over the years, I started to rub shoulders with some of the brilliant minds behind the new game. Now, not only was I playing the games, but I was in a way living them. The lore behind this mysterious band of geniuses was now manifesting in my real life. I was sharing stories with the wonderful imaginations that brought these hellish, spine-laden chambers and their demonic monstrosities into real life. As a Doom fanatic, it is nothing more than a privilege to be able to call some of these guys great friends. And in the wider retro shooter community, it feels like I found my people. When Doom Eternal was eventually revealed, it felt like we were now a team on a winning run. Just over a decade ago, Doom as an IP was considered kind of dead. And looking back at the leaked footage of the cancelled Doom 4 from 2010, I have to say it was not the game I was looking for from id. I think they were tapping on the window of the squad-based military shooter trend and desperately trying to find a way inside. And I get it. As I said before, I was so disillusioned for so many years because it seemed like squad-based cover shooters were considered the new standard for what a shooter should be. Whoever at id stood up and said, "This feels nothing like Doom at all," has, in a way, changed the course of video game history. I can only imagine this dude saying, "Where's the carnage? Where's the walls made of organs and flesh? Where's the fast and furious power fantasy? Give me some real guns. No, not realistic guns. I mean real guns." Back to Eternal, though. I was lucky enough to be at QuakeCon in 2018 when they did a huge gameplay reveal, and to be in that crowd was something else. Everyone was wowed by the gymnastics. My buddy Mark, who worked on the game, said, "I would say this is the greatest first-person shooter ever made." To me, this seemed like the next real step in first-person shooter design. Doom was always about reflexes, and I wanted to be pushed to the limits in terms of how much I could tackle in-game at once. Now we had jumping, dashing, combat puzzling. In a way, it almost feels like a first-person Smash Brothers, albeit one that requires 20 fingers to play. The skill ceiling is infinite, and the mechanics purr like some sort of super fast car. It is a pleasure to get behind the wheel of Doom Eternal and test your ability. Doom Eternal released in the beginning of the big terrible awful that happened in 2020. Obviously, what seemed like a nice excuse to spend some time in Doom Eternal before being free by summer turned into a sort of surreal apocalyptic nightmare. But I'll never forget those first few cozy weeks being told to sit inside and play one of your favorite video games, all for the good of the health of the world. It was around this time that I started collecting Doom stuff as well. I don't know why. Maybe it was a pandemic hobby. I can't explain, but over the years, I've collected all sorts of Doom stuff, including versions of Doom on consoles that I don't even own. Hence the name, The Room of Doom. I even had a Doom-themed guitar at one point, with a graphic made by someone whose art actually made it into Eternal.
All this to say, it's incredible that such a small team of dorks in the 90s can create something so legendary that it informs every single aspect of a person's tastes.
Without 1993's Doom, I probably wouldn't have started listening to heavier music. I certainly wouldn't have had the appreciation of computing that I have now. I wouldn't have picked up a guitar. God, who would I have been? Maybe someone a little more adjusted, but also maybe a little sadder. because little has brought me so much joy to my senses quite like this series. And with the brilliant looking Doom, the Dark Ages on the horizon, it's time to get lost in the hype train again. I am thrilled to see what Hugo and the boys have cooked up for us this time. As the third game in the modern Doom series, will it be a marked departure like before? While the gymnastics of Eternal have taken a backseat to time combos, blocks, and parrying, it still has that familiar recipe of a reflex-based skill ceiling and, of course, badass-looking environments that carry on the diabolical tradition of the Doom aesthetic. Considering the pedigree of 2016 and Eternal, we know that they know what they're doing. The nervous optimism of 2016's release has been replaced with a confidence that something truly incredible is just around the corner, and I can't wait to ingrain it into my life along with the rest of its fantastic games. A salute to id Software.
I hope you've enjoyed this little look into my life and what a huge influence this game has had on me as a person. In such an uncertain time for the world, I want to add a little enthusiasm and positivity to your day by talking about things I love, and that's what Yesterdave is all about. My name is Dave McElfatrick, you've been watching Yesterdave, and I'll see you in the next episode.